The alarm on Rosie Callahan's phone went off at 4:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before it was supposed to, because Lena had kicked it off the nightstand sometime in the dark hours and reset the time without knowing it. That was the kind of thing that happened when your 3-year-old shared a twin bed with you in a rented room barely bigger than a walk-in closet. That was the kind of thing that happened when life had quietly stripped away every luxury, every safety net, every person you thought would catch you, until all that remained was one small, sleeping girl with her dark curls fanned across a second-hand pillow and the fierce, exhausted love of her mother. Rosie lay still for a moment, listening to Lena breathe. The sound was the most grounding thing in her world. Soft and even and completely unaware of the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, of the check that hadn't cleared, of the fact that Rosie had eaten half portions for 6 days straight so Lena could have full ones. The little girl slept with one arm thrown over her stuffed rabbit, a toy so worn its button eyes had been replaced twice, and her lips were parted slightly, dreaming something sweet. "I'm doing this for you," Rosie thought, the way she thought it every morning. Every single day, "I'm doing this for you." She eased out of bed without waking her daughter, moving with the practiced silence of a woman who had learned to exist quietly. In the bathroom, she brushed her teeth with the lights off. The landlord had been threatening to raise utilities again, and changed into her uniform. Black slacks, a white button-down, hair pinned back into a neat bun. Not glamorous. Not what she'd imagined for herself at 28. But honest. And Rosie Callahan had always believed, even when belief cost her something, that honesty was worth holding on to. She worked as a housekeeping staff member at Hargrove Tower, one of the most prestigious residential skyscrapers in downtown Chicago, a gleaming monument of glass and steel that housed some of the city's wealthiest families in penthouse suites and sky-high apartments. Rosie had been there for 2 years, assigned primarily to the upper floors. She vacuumed hallways that cost more per square foot than her entire apartment building. She polished mirrors in which she caught only brief, tired glimpses of herself before moving on. She laundered linens so fine they felt like water in her hands, and she did it all without complaint, without resentment. Or at least she tried to. Lena went to Mrs. Patterson's daycare 3 days a week. The other 2 days, on Rosie's early shifts, she brought Lena with her, carefully, quietly, tucked into the service entrance, while Rosie worked with one eye always on the door. It wasn't allowed. She knew that. But childcare costs money she didn't have, and the alternative was leaving her 3-year-old daughter alone, which wasn't an alternative at all. That Tuesday morning in late October, Chicago had turned mean with cold. Rosie bundled Lena into her warmest coat, a bright yellow one with a hood shaped like a duck, donated from the church thrift box, and carried her on one hip and her cleaning caddy on the other. Lena was still half asleep, her head drooping against Rosie's shoulder, small fingers curled into her mother's collar. "Where are we going, Mama?" she murmured. "To work, baby. Go back to sleep." "Is it the tall building?" "Yes, baby." "The one with the shiny floors?" "That's the one." Lena made a small sound of contentment and closed her eyes again. She trusted her mother completely. That trust, so absolute, so unearned by anything Rosie felt she deserved, was the thing that broke her heart and rebuilt it every single morning. The service elevator at Hargrove Tower smelled like floor wax and old coffee. Rosie rode it up to the 34th floor, where she was assigned, settled Lena onto the blanket she kept in her caddy, and set her up in the small housekeeping alcove at the end of the hall, hidden, safe, with a rabbit and a juice box and strict instructions to stay quiet and still. "You're my best girl," Rosie whispered, kissing her forehead. "I know," Lena said simply, already pulling her rabbit close. Rosie had been mopping the hallway for 20 minutes when she heard it, the sound that her stomach had been dreading for months. The ding of the private elevator that served only the penthouse level, and then heels. Sharp, deliberate, expensive heels on marble. Claire Weston descended into the hallway like she owned it, which, in her mind, she very nearly did. She was 29, blonde, immaculately dressed in a cream Chanel coat and dark sunglasses she hadn't yet removed even though she was indoors. She was the fiancée of William Johnson, the William Johnson, tech billionaire, Forbes 30 under 42 years running, owner of the entire penthouse floor of Hargrove Tower. Their engagement had been in every society column and lifestyle blog in Chicago for the past 3 months. The ring on Claire's finger cost more than Rosie earned in 5 years. Claire walked directly into the wet section of the floor Rosie had just mopped. "Excuse me," Rosie said quickly, stepping forward. "I'm so sorry. I should have put up a sign. Let me just..." Claire looked down at her heels, then up at Rosie, with the specific expression of a woman who has never once had to consider the existence of the person standing in front of her. "You got my shoes wet," she said flatly. "I apologize. Do you understand what these shoes cost?" Claire interrupted, her voice climbing. "Do you have any actual concept of that?" Rosie kept her expression neutral. She had learned, in 2 years of this work, that neutrality was armor. "I'm very sorry. I'll be more careful about the signage." "More careful." Claire repeated the words like they tasted bad. She looked at Rosie, really looked at her, the tired eyes, the cheap uniform, the hands red from cleaning product. Something cruel flickered across her face. You know, they really should hire people who can manage basic tasks without making a mess. "But I suppose this is what you get with..." She gestured vaguely at Rosie, at all of her, at the entirety of her circumstances. "This level." Rosie's jaw tightened. This level. 2 words that contained a universe of contempt. She was still forming her carefully measured, professional response when a sound split the hallway. A child's cry. High and sudden and unmistakably real. Rosie's heart lurched into her throat. From down the hall, from the alcove where Lena was supposed to be quietly tucked away with her rabbit and her juice box, came the broken, frightened sobbing of a 3-year-old who had woken up alone in an unfamiliar space and couldn't find her mother. Claire turned sharply toward the sound. Rosie moved faster than she ever had in her life. William Johnson had been awake since 3 in the morning. This was not unusual. Sleep, for William, had always been a negotiation, something his body occasionally agreed to, but his mind refused to honor. There were too many variables in motion at any given hour, too many threads of thought that refused to still themselves just because the city outside his floor-to-ceiling windows had gone dark and quiet. His company, John Tech, was in the middle of a merger that would define the next decade of his professional life. His board was fractious. His publicist kept texting him about the engagement announcement's reception in the press. And somewhere beneath all of that, in a place he didn't examine too carefully, something had been feeling deeply, persistently wrong for months. He told himself it was stress. He told himself it was the merger. He told himself a lot of things that were probably partial truths and definitely not the whole story. At 7:15 a.m., he was standing at the kitchen counter in his penthouse, still in the gray t-shirt and joggers he'd slept in briefly, drinking coffee and looking out at the Chicago skyline going pink and gold in the early light. It was beautiful in a way that felt distant, like he was watching it through glass, which of course he was, but that wasn't what he meant. He heard Claire leave. The bedroom door, then the closet door, then the front door, each one with that particular emphasis she gave to objects when she was annoyed, which was often these days, though when he asked her about it she would say she was fine. He watched the elevator light descend on the panel by the door. He should get dressed. He had a call at 8. Instead, he refilled his coffee and sat down at the kitchen island, staring at a contract he'd already read 4 times. His phone buzzed, his assistant, Marcus, checking if he'd reviewed the revised terms. He typed back yes, and then set the phone face down, which was something he'd been doing a lot lately, without fully understanding why. The penthouse was large and luminous and filled with things that were beautiful and correct. The furniture was chosen by a designer whose name appeared in architectural magazines. The art on the walls had been vetted by a curator. The whole space was organized around the principle of tasteful, curated wealth, which was to say, it looked less like a home and more like a very expensive argument about what a home should look like. William had grown up in a two-bedroom house in Rockford, Illinois. His father had been a mechanic. His mother had worked reception at a dental office. He had been, by every measure, ordinary, until suddenly, at 24, he wasn't. The company had happened fast, the way certain things do when preparation meets the exact right moment, and within a few years he'd been transplanted into a world of penthouses and board meetings and charity galas and women like Claire Weston, who belonged to that world the way she belonged to the Chanel coat and the sunglasses, and the very specific kind of confidence that comes not from accomplishment, but from the unquestioned assumption of one's own value. He was 33 years old. He was engaged to be married. He was, by every external measure, a success. He felt like a man living in someone else's life. He was thinking this, not quite that clearly, but approximately, when he heard voices in the hallway. Through the penthouse door, muffled but audible. Claire's voice, which had that edge to it, that particular register she used when speaking to service staff. And another voice, quieter, contained, professional. He couldn't make out the words, but he could hear the shape of the exchange. He was just about to return his attention to the contract when a child began to cry. The sound was immediate and clear, cutting through the door with the particular urgency that children's voices carry, that biological frequency that bypasses adult composure and goes straight to something older and more instinctual. It was the cry of a small person who was frightened. Not hurt. He could hear the difference, but frightened and alone and looking for someone who wasn't there yet. William set down his coffee.
He didn't think about it.
He moved to the door and opened it. The scene in the hallway arranged itself before him like something he'd need a moment to understand. Claire was standing 10 feet away with her arms crossed, face a careful mask of displeasure. A woman in a housekeeping uniform was half-sprinting toward the far end of the corridor, where a tiny figure in a yellow duck coat had emerged from a supply alcove and was standing in the middle of the hall, face crumpled, tears streaming, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit to her chest. The woman in the uniform reached the child in seconds, dropping to her knees on the hard floor with no hesitation, wrapping both arms around the little girl and pulling her in so completely that the child disappeared into her. "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, baby," she was saying, a phrase repeated like a prayer, like an incantation, like the most important sentence in the English language. "Mama's right here.
You're okay.
I'm right here." The child's crying shifted immediately from the jagged, rising panic of abandonment to the softer, shuddering release of a fear resolved. She pressed her face into the woman's neck and held on. William stood in his doorway and watched this. He didn't know why he couldn't look away. He had seen thousands of things in his life, presentations that changed his company, views from summits that were supposed to be transcendent, moments orchestrated specifically to produce awe. But there was something about this, the speed of that woman's response, the complete and unconditional nature of her reassurance, the way the little girl's panic dissolved the instant she was held, that struck him somewhere deep and quiet. Then he heard Claire. "Is this actually happening?" Her voice was sharp with disbelief. "You brought your child to work? Do you understand that's a serious violation? You could be fired for this." The woman, still on her knees, still holding the little girl, turned her face slightly toward Claire. Her expression was complicated. Embarrassed, yes, but also braced, like a person who had learned to absorb blows without going down. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll handle it." "You'll handle it," Claire repeated with that tone. "You'll handle it. Like you handle my shoes? Like you handled not putting up proper signage? You people." "That's enough." The words came out of William's mouth before he decided to say them. He heard them land in the hallway, clear and absolute, and watched Claire turn to him with an expression of pure surprise. He stepped fully out of his doorway. The hallway went very still. Claire's surprise lasted approximately 3 seconds before it reorganized itself into something more familiar, the particular composure of a woman who is skilled at quickly reclaiming a narrative. She lowered her sunglasses half an inch and looked at William with the cool, questioning look she used in situations she wanted to redirect. William, his name in her mouth, at that moment, was equal parts greeting and warning. He didn't look at her. He was looking at Rosie, still kneeling on the floor, one arm around Lena, who had quieted now and was watching the tall man in the doorway with the large, clear eyes of a 3-year-old who has learned that adults in strange situations require observing. "Are you all right?" William asked, and then, glancing down at the child, "Is she all right?" Rosie blinked. It was, she would think later, such a simple question. For words. Completely ordinary. And yet she could not remember the last time someone at this building, someone with any authority or proximity to authority, had asked her that. "Are you all right?" She felt something loosen dangerously in her chest. "We're fine," she said, her voice steady with effort. "I apologize for the disruption. This won't." "Don't apologize." He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with Lena, who stared at him with the direct, unfiltered assessment of a child. "Hey there. What's your name?" Lena looked at her mother. Rosie gave the small nod that meant it's okay. "Lena," the girl said, in the grave, deliberate way of very young children delivering important information. "Lena," William repeated. "That's a great name. Is that your rabbit?" Lena looked down at the rabbit, then back up at him. "Her name is Button." "Button." He nodded seriously. "Good name for a rabbit." Lena considered this. "She only has one button eye now," she informed him. "The other one fell off. Mama is going to fix it when she finds the right button." "Well, Button looks like she's doing pretty good despite the circumstances." Lena almost smiled. It was the almost that got Rosie, the tiny, tentative crack in her daughter's tear-streaked face that said this person is safe. Lena had her mother's instincts, which were, after everything, still functional. William stood back up and turned to Claire. Something had settled in his face. Not anger exactly, but resolve. The kind of resolve that comes not from a decision made in the moment, but from a decision that was apparently always there, waiting to be recognized. "Can you go upstairs?" he said. "I'll be up in a few minutes." It wasn't a question. Claire registered this. A muscle in her jaw moved. She looked from William to Rosie and back, and whatever she read in his expression made her choose, wisely, not to argue right now. She turned and walked back to the elevator with the measured precision of a woman saving a larger fight for a better moment. The elevator doors closed. William turned back to Rosie. "Walk me through this," he said, not unkindly. "What's the situation?" Rosie was still processing the speed at which everything had shifted. She stood up, keeping one hand on Lena's shoulder, a reflex, a grounding point. "My name is Rosie Callahan," she said. "I'm on the housekeeping staff for this floor. My daughter, she's 3. My regular childcare is 3 days a week. On my early shift days, I sometimes bring her with me. She stays in the alcove. She's quiet. She's never." She stopped, reoriented. "I know it's against the rules. I take full responsibility. Why can't you arrange different childcare for those days?" The question wasn't unkind, but it was direct, and Rosie hesitated only half a second before giving him the same directness back. She was too tired for anything else. Cost. He nodded once. How long have you worked here? 2 years. Do you have a supervisor who knows about this arrangement? A pause.
No.
He looked at her for a moment. Not the way Claire had looked at her. Not measuring her deficits, cataloging her circumstances as evidence of lesser worth. He looked at her the way you look at a problem you want to actually solve.
Come inside, he said.
Both of you. I'll make some phone calls. Rosie stared at him. I'm sorry. You can't work in the hallway with her. Come inside. She can sit in the kitchen, there's a tablet she can use, and I think there might be cereal, and we'll figure out a better situation for you. Mr. Johnson, you don't need to. I know I don't need to, he said simply. Come inside. She would wonder later what made her say yes. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was that Lena was already looking at the open penthouse door with an expression of profound interest, the kind of look that meant there are probably interesting things in there. Maybe it was that William Johnson, billionaire, 33 years old, who occupied a floor that represented everything Rosie's life was not, had spoken to her daughter with complete and natural respect, and that, in Rosie's experience, was rarer than almost anything. She followed him inside. The penthouse was, as she'd expected, extraordinary. But what Rosie noticed first, what she would always remember noticing first, was that it looked slightly lonely. Beautiful and immaculate and lonely, the way very large spaces do when the person living in them hasn't fully arrived yet. William found a tablet and set Lena up at the kitchen island with an age-appropriate drawing app and a bowl of Cheerios that Lena accepted with the dignity of someone who has determined that cereal is an entirely reasonable breakfast in a billionaire's kitchen. Then he poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Rosie, who looked at it for a moment like she wasn't sure she was allowed. Drink it, he said. You look like you haven't slept. She almost laughed. Is it that obvious? A little. He sat down across from her. Tell me about your schedule. And she did. She told him about the 2 days without regular childcare, about the cost calculations she ran constantly in her head, about the way she'd structured the alcove setup, the blanket, the juice box, the toys, to minimize any risk. She told him matter-of-factly, without self-pity, the way you describe logistics to someone who has asked a logistics question. He listened, not with the half attention of someone waiting to speak, but with the full, still attention of someone genuinely processing what they were hearing. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. I'm going to make some calls, he said. There's a child care center. The Hargrove Foundation runs it. It's connected to this building. It's excellent. I'm going to find out why you're not enrolled in the assistance program. Rosie blinked. There's an assistance program? There's supposed to be. For building staff with children. He pulled out his phone. I'll find out what happened. She watched him dial, listened to the efficient, authoritative way he spoke, not unkindly, but clearly and with expectation of results, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not gratitude exactly, though that was part of it. Something more complicated. The particular sensation of being seen not as a problem, not as a circumstance, but as a person worth solving a problem for. Next to her, Lena held up the tablet. Mama, I drew a duck. Rosie looked at the screen. It was unmistakably a duck. That's a beautiful duck, baby. William looked over. That's a really good duck, he said. And he sounded like he meant it. The calls took 45 minutes. By the end of them, William had spoken to the building's HR director, the director of the Hargrove Foundation Child Care Center, and, with a barely controlled frustration that Rosie witnessed from across the kitchen island, the mid-level administrator who had apparently failed to notify lower-income staff of the sliding scale assistance program that had been in place for 3 years. Lena had, by this point, finished her Cheerios, drawn 4 more animals on the tablet, cat, 2 rabbits, and something she described as a purple elephant, but she's happy, and fallen asleep on the kitchen bench with her cheek resting on Button, the one-eyed rabbit, completely untroubled by the strangeness of her surroundings. Rosie had drunk both cups of coffee and was working on a third that William had silently refilled without asking. "It's handled," he said, setting his phone down. "You're enrolled as of today. There's a spot available starting Thursday, full week coverage. The copay will be based on your income. I think it comes out to about $40 a month." Rosie stared at him. $40.
42, maybe.
"Marcus will send you the paperwork." She had been paying nearly $400 a month for 3 days at Mrs. Patterson's, which she could not really afford but had made work through a combination of not buying herself new shoes in 18 months and eating those half portions she didn't mention to anyone. $42, she said again, quietly, mostly to herself. "You should have been told about this when you were hired," he said, and there was something in his voice, a tightness, that told her he was genuinely angry about that, on her behalf, which was a sensation she didn't quite know how to receive.
"Thank you," she said.
The words felt completely insufficient. "I don't," she stopped. "Thank you." He nodded. He was looking at Lena, sleeping on the bench. His expression was one Rosie couldn't entirely read, something thoughtful and private, something that surfaced only when he thought no one was watching him. "She's extraordinary," he said. "She's 3, Rosie said. She drew a purple elephant. "She's 3 and she drew a purple elephant, and she told me her rabbit's name with complete seriousness." A pause. Children that age take things seriously in a way adults forget how to. Is that a bad thing? When adults forget. He looked at her. It was the first time, in the whole conversation, that she'd offered something that wasn't directly responsive to a practical question. They both seemed to register it simultaneously. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I think it is." Rosie finished her coffee. She should go. She had floors to clean, a schedule to return to, a life to reconstruct. She started to gather herself. "Can I ask you something?" William said. She waited. "What do you want?" he asked. "Not right now, not for Lena, I mean in general. What do you want your life to look like?" The question was so unexpected that Rosie simply sat with it for several seconds. Nobody had asked her that in a very long time.
Possibly years.
Her own answer came from somewhere she'd kept carefully covered, like a plant you protect through winter, not sure if it's still alive until the first day warm enough to check. "I was in nursing school," she said. "Before Lena. I had 1 semester left." She said it without drama, without self-pity, just the fact of it. "I want to finish." He looked at her steadily. "What stopped you?" Her father left when she was 6 weeks old. "I couldn't manage school and an infant and rent by myself." She shrugged, a small, careful shrug, armor that had been worn smooth with use. "So, I set it aside. I'll pick it back up when she's older." "You shouldn't have to wait that long." "Most people do," she said simply. "Wait, I mean, for the life they were aiming for." She stood, gently lifting the edge of the bench. "I should wake her up and let you get on with your day." "Leave her a few minutes," he said. She just fell asleep. A pause. "Please." Rosie sat back down. The silence between them was comfortable in a way that surprised her. Not the strained quiet of 2 people with nothing to say, but the easy quiet of 2 people who have, unexpectedly, said enough real things to have established a kind of trust. Upstairs, she knew, Claire was waiting. She could feel the weight of that, the complicated, expensive weight of William Johnson's life above this moment. She wasn't naive. She was a housekeeping employee who'd spent the morning in a billionaire's kitchen because his fiancée had been cruel in the hallway and his own decency had interrupted the usual script. This wasn't a story. This was a Tuesday morning. But something in the way he'd asked, "What do you want your life to look like?" Something in the quality of that question, in the way he'd listened to the answer, in the way he was still sitting here across from her in a gray t-shirt at 8 in the morning looking like a man who was also, in his own way, waiting for a life that fit. She didn't let herself finish the thought. When Lena stirred and blinked awake, looking around with the confused, endearing expression of a child reorienting to an unexpected location, William handed her back the tablet without being asked. Lena looked at it, looked at him, and said, without preamble, "I'm going to draw you a house." He looked momentarily taken aback. Then, "I would like that very much." "It'll have a dog," Lena informed him. "Even better." Rosie stood, and this time he didn't ask her to stay. But as she lifted Lena onto her hip and gathered the rabbit and thanked him once more, sincerely, simply, without performance, he said something that stopped her in the doorway. "I'm going to have the copay retroactively applied. The difference from what you've been paying." He said it quickly, like he wanted to get it out before she could object. "Consider it a building correction for the administrative failure." She looked at him. Her throat tightened unexpectedly.
"You don't have to do that," she said.
"I know." She nodded once. She left. In the elevator going down, Lena looked up at her with the house drawing still open on the borrowed tablet. She'd apparently kept it, and said, "Mama, I like that man." Rosie pressed her lips together. "I know, baby," she said. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, several things happened simultaneously, which is how life tends to arrange its most significant movements, not in clear sequence, but layered, overlapping, each one shifting the weight on the others. Lena started at the Hargrove Foundation Child Care Center on a Thursday. She walked in holding Button by one ear, assessed the room with the calm precision of a child who has learned to read environments quickly, identified the corner with the most animals in it, and headed directly there. She did not cry. She did not cling. She turned once at the door to wave at Rosie with the brisk, self-possessed wave of a person who has places to be. Rosie stood in the hallway for a moment after the door closed, pressing one hand flat against the wall, breathing. $42 a month. The retroactive correction William had processed had covered 4 months of overpayment. It appeared in her account as a line item labeled Hargrove Building Staff Assistance Program, retroactive adjustment. She had stared at it for a long time. It didn't fix everything. It didn't fix most things. But it fixed enough to breathe a little easier, to eat full portions, to stop calculating so ruthlessly every time she bought Lena a box of the cereal she liked. On the floors she cleaned, Rosie moved through her work with the same quiet efficiency as always. She saw William Johnson twice in those 3 weeks, brief, hallway sightings, the kind that happen in large buildings between people who have shared something unusual and not yet determined what to do with it. The first time, he was on his phone, walking quickly toward the elevator. He caught her eye and nodded, a small nod, but direct, personal, not the reflexive non-acknowledgement that residents usually offered staff. She nodded back. The second time, Lena was with her, a Saturday, when the center was closed and Rosie had a half shift and no other option. Lena spotted William from halfway down the hall with the unerring instinct of a child for the people she has decided she likes. "The houseman," she announced, at a volume that echoed off the marble. William stopped walking. Something shifted in his face, something that looked, from Rosie's vantage point, very much like the specific happiness of a person who wasn't expecting to feel it. "Hey, Lena," he said, crouching down. "Did you finish the house?" She had. She'd finished it on her second day at the center and had given the drawing to her new teacher, Ms. Angela, but had described it in detail to her mother, the dog, the big windows, the tree in the front yard with apples on it, because Lena felt that all good houses should have apple trees. Lena informed him of all of this now, standing in the hallway with Button under her arm, speaking with the earnest authority of an architect presenting her portfolio. William listened with complete attention, asking appropriate follow-up questions. Rosie watched them from the side, pretending to restock her caddy, feeling something expand in her chest that she couldn't afford to examine. Meanwhile, upstairs, things between William and Claire were deteriorating in the way of things that have been wrong for a while and have simply run out of time to pretend otherwise. Rosie knew this only indirectly, through the particular atmospheric pressure of the penthouse floor, through fragments overheard on days she cleaned the lobby-level shared spaces, through the way building staff read the emotional weather of their residents the way sailors read actual weather. There was a certain tightness on the floor. Certain silences. What she didn't know, and wouldn't know for some time, was that William had been thinking about the hallway. About the moment he'd stepped out of his door. About the specific clarity of that moment, which had felt, in retrospect, like the first thing he'd done in months that was wholly and entirely himself. He had watched Claire, in the days that followed, with new eyes. Not harsh eyes. He wasn't looking for reasons to end something, but honest eyes. And what he saw, when he looked with honesty, was that Claire was a person he genuinely cared about and was not actually in love with, and that this distinction, which he had been finding ways not to make for 2 years, was no longer one he could avoid. The conversation happened on a Wednesday evening, quiet and long and painful in the way that conversations are when both people understand, somewhere beneath the words, that what is ending is real and mattered, and still doesn't have a future. Claire left Hargrove Tower on a Thursday morning. She did not walk past Rosie in the hallway this time. She took a private car from the building's lower entrance. Rosie didn't know about it until Monday, when the building's social ecosystem, which was smaller and more connected than any of its residents imagined, carried the news. She was mopping the 33rd floor when Marcus, William's assistant, appeared in the hallway. He was a compact, efficient man in his early 30s who treated all building staff with the same brisk, equal respect he brought to everything else. "Miss Callahan," he said, "Mr. Johnson would like to speak with you when you have a moment. His schedule is open at noon." Rosie's mop stopped. "Is something wrong?" she asked carefully. "Not at all," Marcus said. And then, with the faintest inflection of something human beneath the professional surface, he specifically said if she's willing. She thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. "Tell him noon is fine," she said. She knocked on the penthouse door at noon with Lena on her hip. It was Wednesday, center was closed for a staff training day, and Rosie had been unwilling to leave her daughter in the alcove again, so she'd sent a text through Marcus apologizing and offering to reschedule, and William had sent back, "Bring her. I bought more Cheerios." Which was such a specific and unexpectedly thoughtful thing to have done that Rosie had stood in the hallway reading the text twice before she could put her phone back in her pocket. He opened the door in dark slacks and a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and for a moment the three of them stood in the doorway regarding one another with the uncertain, charged quality of people who have arrived at something without a map. Then Lena said, "You got Cheerios?" "Honey ones," William said. "Those are the best ones," she said gravely and walked in. The penthouse felt different today. Some of the furniture had been rearranged, or perhaps Rosie was looking at it differently, but it felt less like a showroom and more like a place someone was trying to actually live in. There were papers on the kitchen island, a jacket thrown over the back of a chair, a book left open on the counter, small signs of occupancy, of presence, of a man settling back into his own life. Lena installed herself at the island with the honey Cheerios and the tablet and resumed her drawing practice without preamble. William poured coffee. Rosie sat across from him, and they looked at each other for a moment with the specific directness of two people who have already been honest with each other once and are deciding whether to do it again. "I wanted to check in," he said. "The childcare, it's working out?" "It's been wonderful," she said honestly. "Lena loves it. She's already apparently the leader of the animal corner. A pause. Thank you. I know I keep saying it. You can stop saying it, he said, not unkindly. It was the right thing to do. That's all it was. She nodded. Then, I also heard about you and Claire. She said it directly because she had found, in his company, that directness was both allowed and respected. I'm sorry. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not sure you need to be.
Still.
It's difficult. Yes, he agreed. It's difficult. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. But the difficult thing and the right thing were the same thing. That happens sometimes. He looked up. You know something about that? I do, she said. Outside, Chicago was doing what it did in November. The sky the color of old concrete, the lake steel gray, the city hunkered into its coat. But the light in the penthouse was warm, and Lena was narrating her drawing to herself in a low, contented murmur, and the coffee was good, and Rosie Callahan, 28 years old, sitting in a billionaire's kitchen in her housekeeping uniform, felt something she recognized only after a moment's inventory as peace. I want to talk to you about something, William said. And I want you to know that I've been thinking about it carefully, and it has nothing to do with, he paused, choosing his words, anything except what seems like the right thing. She waited. The building has a partnership with Northwestern's nursing school. Continued education support for staff, full tuition assistance, scheduling flexibility, the works. It's underutilized because, again, people aren't being told about it adequately. The tightness she'd heard before, returning briefly. I'd like to nominate you for the program. You have 1 semester left. You could finish in 5 months. Rosie's breath stopped. She started. I know it's a lot, he said. And I know it's not simple. You'd still need to manage Lena's schedule, and the shift flexibility would need to be negotiated with your supervisor, and there are application steps. But I've looked into it, and it's completely viable. He paused. You said you want to finish. You should finish. The plant she'd kept covered through winter. She felt it now, the warmth of a day finally warm enough to check on it, to find it alive, to discover that it had been alive all along, waiting. Why are you doing this? She asked. Not suspiciously. Genuinely. He was quiet for a moment, and what he said next was something he hadn't planned to say, something that came from whatever place had been sending him small signals for months that he was living in the wrong direction. Because I think people like you, he started, then stopped. That's the wrong framing. Because you, specifically you, are someone who has been carrying a weight that was arranged by circumstance and not by any failure of your own. And I'm in a position to move some of it. And moving it is the obvious thing. He met her eyes. But also because you're the first person in a long time who said something real to me without any agenda. And that was worth more than you know. Rosie looked at him. She thought about the hallway, the wet floor and the cruel voice and the small cry that changed a Tuesday morning and maybe more than a Tuesday morning. She thought about Lena drawing houses for strangers because she had been raised to believe that generosity is simply what people do with their capacity. She thought about nursing school, 1 semester unfinished, kept alive under careful cover for 3 years. She thought about what she wanted her life to look like. Okay, she said. Okay, you'll apply? Okay, I'll apply. A pause. And okay to the rest of it too. He looked at her carefully. The rest of it? Whatever this is, she said simply and gestured between them and at the kitchen and at Lena at the island, who had apparently drawn a new house, this one with a bigger apple tree and, she would later announce, 2 dogs. William was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, I would like that. Very much. Me too, said Lena, without looking up from her drawing. They both looked at her. She continued drawing with complete serenity, the way children do when they have delivered a verdict and consider the matter settled. Rosie laughed, A real laugh, unguarded. The kind that comes from a place you'd forgotten was still open. And William laughed too, and it was clear from the way he did it that it had been a while for him as well. And Lena smiled without looking up, satisfied, because she had known from the first Tuesday morning, from the crouching and the serious questions about Button's name, and the understanding that Honey Cheerios were the best kind, that this was a person who belonged in their orbit. Children are often right about these things. In the months that followed, Rosie enrolled in the nursing program and finished her last semester in the spring, studying in the kitchen of a penthouse that was slowly becoming less like a showroom and more like a home, a real one, with papers on the island and a drawing taped to the refrigerator of a house with 2 dogs and an apple tree and the word home written across the top in purple crayon. She graduated on a Thursday in May, and Lena sat in the front row in a new yellow dress, not donated, not secondhand, bought specifically for the occasion, and when Rosie's name was called and she walked across that stage, a small voice in the front row said, very loudly and with absolute joy, "That's my mama." Everyone around them laughed. William, seated beside Lena, did not laugh. He looked at Rosie on that stage, in her cap and gown, standing straight and bright-eyed with the particular radiance of someone who has arrived at a destination they had almost stopped believing in, and felt, with complete clarity, that this was the most important thing he had ever witnessed from a front-row seat. He had grown up ordinary. He had become extraordinary by accident and ambition and luck. But this woman who had scrubbed floors and eaten half portions and protected a plant through winter, this was the kind of extraordinary that was built by choice, deliberately one day at a time, without applause. He intended, with everything in him, to be worthy of it. Later that evening, at a small dinner, just the 3 of them and Marcus and Mrs. Patterson, who cried twice and didn't apologize for it, Lena fell asleep at the table with Button under her arm and a smear of cake frosting on her cheek, and William looked across the table at Rosie and said, quietly, so only she could hear, "I'm going to ask you something eventually. Not tonight, but eventually." She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. "Okay." She smiled. "Ask eventually," she said. "I'll be here." And she was. And he did. And Lena, when asked if she approved, presented them both with a new drawing, a house larger than the previous ones, with 3 people in front of it and an apple tree and 4 dogs, because by that point she felt that 4 dogs was the correct number for a family that had chosen each other on purpose.
She was right about that too.
The end. Some people enter your life quietly, through service entrances and early mornings and the sound of a child crying in a hallway. They are not loud. They are not announced. But they change everything, the way a single honest moment can shift the direction of a whole life, if you are paying attention and if you are brave enough to step through the door. Yellow heart for every mother who swallowed her tears so her child could smile. You are seen. You are enough. You are extraordinary.